Picking up from our previous discussion on explaining lots and predicting little, let's dive into a fascinating case study that really puts the human element front and center. We're talking about psychologist Antoinette Gobodo Madikizela interviewing Eugene de Kock, a notorious figure in South Africa's apartheid era. You'd think the goal was purely clinical, right? Get the facts about his death squad activities. But what unfolded was something far more complex. De Kock wasn't just a villain, he was a multifaceted, contradictory person. He showed remorse here, defiance there. He was indifferent to some atrocities, but proud of his own personal code of conduct within the system. He blamed his bosses but insisted on his control over his men. It was messy real. Then came the moment that broke Gobodo Madikizela. De Kock tentatively asked if she knew he'd killed anyone close to her family. He hadn't. But that question, that vulnerability, shattered her professional detachment. She found herself empathizing with him, deeply troubled. The automaticity of her reaching out, touching his finger through the bars, speaks volumes about how, despite everything, some tenuous threads of useness can form, even in the most unlikely places. Now, let's talk about building walls, but not just any walls. Sometimes conflict forces groups to actively burn their bridges back home, creating a powerful new U.S. category based on shared adversity and exclusion. Think about the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya. The British were focused on the Kikuyu tribe, whose land they seized. Now the Kikuyu weren't naturally warlike like the Maasai next door. So how do you turn peaceful farmers into rebels? Through intense symbolic acts like horrific oaths that violated every sacred Kikuyu taboo imaginable. The message was brutal. You've cut ties with your past life, your only family now is this movement. It's a classic strategy. Create an us defined by shared sacrifice and the loss of everything familiar. This isn't just historical, it's tragically used today with child soldiers. Groups force kids to commit acts so horrific, like killing family members, that their old life is utterly destroyed. We are your family now, the message goes. And it works horrifyingly well. But the flip side is crucial. When these bridges aren't burned or can be rebuilt, recovery is possible. Look at child soldiers who are rescued. Their chances of healing dramatically increase if someone, a relative, accepts them back. That unburned bridge offers a lifeline. This brings us to the heartbreaking reality of unburned bridges, or rather, bridges that society refuses to rebuild. Remember the kidnapping of those Nigerian schoolgirls by Boko Haram? What they endured is almost beyond comprehension: terror, physical abuse, forced labor, countless rapes, pregnancies, even AIDS. Now imagine the unimaginable relief and hope when even a few are rescued. But here's the cruel twist. Many are met not with celebration, but with shunning. Why? Fear of AIDS transmission, fear that they've been brainwashed into sleeper agents, deep-seated stigma surrounding children born from rape. This societal rejection adds another layer of trauma, potentially breaking them forever. It's a stark reminder that survival isn't enough. Acceptance and support are critical. When the community turns away, the wounds don't just heal, they fester. It underscores how vital those unburned bridges, or the willingness to rebuild them, truly are for genuine recovery. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked about building us by excluding them. Sometimes the strategy goes further, making the them so alien, so dehumanized, that they cease to be seen as human at all. This is pseudo-speciation. Think about demagogue spinning narratives where the enemy isn't just wrong, but fundamentally subhuman. They become insects, rodents, bacteria, cancerous growths, even filth. Why does this work? Because if you don't see them as people, harming them feels less like murder and more like pest control. Stepping on an ant doesn't feel like murder, does it? Spraying weeds doesn't feel like genocide. This rhetoric is incredibly potent, stripping away empathy and paving the way for horrific actions. It's a dangerous game, and we need to be hyper-vigilant against anyone trying to frame their opponents using such dehumanizing language. It's a slippery slope from criticism to callousness. And pseudo-speciation doesn't always come from overt hatred. Sometimes it's wrapped in the noblest of emotions, empathy. Let's look at the lead up to the Gulf War. Americans were horrified by a story presented before Congress. A young Kuwaiti refugee, Naira, tearfully testified that Iraqi soldiers had stolen incubators from a hospital, leaving hundreds of premature babies to die. Our collective breath was taken away. These people leave babies to die? Inhuman. The story spread like wildfire, cited by senators, used relentlessly by President Bush Sr. to rally public support for war. Approval rating soared. We went to war believing we were fighting monsters. But then, much later, the truth emerged. Naira wasn't a refugee. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. The whole incubator story? A fabrication cooked up by a PR firm, specifically designed to exploit our deepest revulsion against harming infants. It worked brilliantly, manipulating our empathic intuitions for political gain. This is chilling. It shows how easily our moral outrage can be weaponized, whether by painting enemies as monsters or by triggering our protective instincts for babies. Alright, let's pivot to the flip side of conflict: cooperation. How on earth did cooperation evolve? It's a puzzle because, as the prisoner's dilemma shows, the first person to cooperate is always at a disadvantage. So, how do you get started? One idea is founder populations. Imagine a small group gets isolated, maybe due to geography or circumstance. Their average relatedness goes up, kin selection kicks in, they start cooperating, and when they rejoin the larger population, their cooperative genes spread. Another possibility is green beard effects, a genetic trait that creates a visible marker and makes individuals cooperate with others showing the same marker. Think of it as a poor man's kin selection. But here's the kicker. Humans cooperate ridiculously extensively with non-relatives. We hold doors for strangers, follow traffic rules, build massive societies based on shared norms. That requires more than just isolated groups or green beards. We've evolved sophisticated mechanisms. Open-ended play matters, knowing the game might go on forever. The shadow of the future makes cooperation pay off long-term. Multiple games played simultaneously can spill over trust. An open-book play, where reputation is public knowledge, is huge. Knowing someone's track record influences your behavior towards them, enabling forms like indirect reciprocity, where helping one person helps you get help from others down the line. Reputation becomes the currency. Cooperation needs enforcement, right? Otherwise, cheaters thrive. Punishment is key. Interestingly, punishment to promote cooperation isn't unique to humans. You see it in other animals too, like baboons chasing off aggressive males. But in humans, our willingness to pay a cost to punish normbreakers strongly correlates with how prosocial our societies are. Studies show villages in Ethiopia that were willing to spend resources on costly punishment actually had healthier forests, managing the commons better. Cultures with gods who punish transgressors also tend to be more cooperative. But punishment has its downsides. Monitoring and punishing costs money, time, and effort. If cooperation is already stable, maybe it's not worth it. Trust reduces the need for constant vigilance. And who does the punishing? Often it's the victim, especially in direct interactions. They might punish out of anger, to teach a lesson, or even altruistically to deter the punisher from being nasty to others. But this can backfire, offending the punished person and reduce future cooperation. Humans have a superpower here: third-party punishment. Outsiders enforce the rules. This is incredibly effective, but it raises an evolutionary question. Why would you altruistically punish someone else? The answer: layers. We create systems to punish those who don't punish, reward the punishers, share the costs socially, and punish those who try to free ride on the system. Think cops, judges, taxes, and anti-tax evasion laws. It's a complex machinery, but it allows for extraordinary levels of cooperation. If you can choose who you interact with, cooperation gets a massive boost. It's like having a green beard, but instead of genetics, it's conscious choice. You seek out people who seem cooperative. Research shows that adding the ability to refuse to play with someone dramatically increases cooperation rates, often more effectively than simply punishing defectors. Why? Because it lowers the cost of cooperation. You avoid the cheaters altogether. This explains how we manage collective tasks, from raising barns for neighbors to coordinating massive projects like building a city or marching bands, forming intricate patterns. It's about finding your tribe. But remember, cooperation itself is neutral. Just because we cooperate doesn't mean we're doing anything good. A village can cooperate perfectly to ransack a neighboring village. The mechanism exists for both constructive and destructive ends. Let's talk about mending fences after conflict. For chimps, reconciliation is pretty straightforward. A bit of grooming, a shared banana, and they're good. Humans sometimes do it too: a quick apology, a shoulder pat, easy peasy. But what about after something truly massive, like genocide, colonization, or a devastating war? Patching things up becomes incredibly difficult. Here's where humans get unique. We institutionalize reconciliation. Think Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, TRCs. The popular image is tearful apologies, heartfelt forgiveness, a clean slate. Sounds great, right? Well, reality is often grittier. TRCs are usually pragmatic exercises. Perpetrators confess, state they won't harm again. Victims agree not to seek revenge outside the legal system. It's less about personal healing and more about ensuring the nation doesn't collapse. Take South Africa's TRC, led by Desmond Tutu. It was highly respected. Public hearings allowed victims to speak. Yet remarkably few perpetrators showed genuine remorse. The goal wasn't to change individuals overnight, it was to stabilize the country. Studies showed victims felt the TRC helped the nation but failed locally, angry about lack of reparations, perpetrators staying in power, and lingering symbols of injustice. So we have to distinguish between reconciliation, which is about societal functioning, and concepts like remorse or forgiveness, which are deeply personal and moral. Digging deeper into healing, let's look at apologies, reparations, and forgiveness. Apologies aren't simple. Does it matter who apologizes? What they apologize for, and what the recipient wants. Victims respond differently depending on whether they focus on the system, the relationship, or individual autonomy. Think about Bill Clinton apologizing for Japanese internment, laudable, but could he really apologize for FDR? Reparations are even thornier. On one hand, they can be seen as the ultimate proof of sincerity, like the argument for slavery reparations. On the other, offering reparations without adequate remorse can feel like buying forgiveness, which is why Israel initially refused German reparations. Then there's forgiveness itself. Crucially, forgiving isn't forgetting. Neurologically, the original memory isn't erased, it's just overlaid with new learning. Forgiveness is often a self-reported state. Sometimes it's driven by faith, like the Charleston Church Massacre survivors forgiving Dylan Roof. Other times, it involves radical cognitive shifts, like Jennifer Thompson Canino forgiving Ronald Cotton after DNA proved he was wrongly convicted. Ultimately, forgiveness often serves the forgiver, freeing them from the exhausting cycle of hatred. Booker T. Washington put it well. I shall allow no man to belittle my soul by making me hate him. And studies suggest forgiveness can even improve health. Finally, truth matters immensely. For victims, hearing perpetrators detail their atrocities publicly, unflinchingly, is often the highest priority. It's about validation and exposing the horror. Okay, let's get real. Despite economists wanting us to be rational calculators, we're not. We're messy, irrational beings. We give generously when logic says otherwise. We decide guilt rationally but punish emotionally. Half of us flip-flop on moral decisions based on trivial differences, like pushing versus pulling levers in trolley problems. We resist cheating effortlessly when no one's watching, yet make strong moral claims we can barely justify. Recognizing these systematic irrationalities is key. Sometimes we try to overcome them, like the visceral resistance to shaking hands with enemies you hate, essential for diplomacy. Or acknowledging implicit biases, those unconscious preferences that shape our us/them divides. Making them explicit doesn't erase them, but it helps us monitor them. Even seemingly trivial things, like judges needing food breaks, highlight how unconscious factors influence decisions. Irrational optimism is another beast. It's great for mental health, preventing depression, but disastrous in war, leading to overconfidence, underestimating enemies, and disastrous strategic blunders. And finally, sacred values. Those things we value irrationally, symbolically, are surprisingly important for lasting peace. Rational negotiation sets the stage, but the irrational commitment to certain principles often seals the deal. Here's a fascinating insight from David Grossman's work on killing. It turns out humans are surprisingly bad at close-range, hand-to-hand violence. Think about soccer riots or football hooliganism. Footage shows most people aren't actually fighting. They're watching, panicking, or throwing ineffective punches. Grossman dug into this historically. After Gettysburg, thousands of muskets were found loaded but unfired, or reloaded multiple times while soldiers stood around doing other things. In World War II, only a tiny fraction of riflemen ever fired their weapons. Why? Not necessarily hatred or blind obedience. It's partly the pseudo-kinship of battle, the urge to protect buddies, but also a deep, natural aversion to killing someone face to face. Grossman identified a hierarchy of resistance. Knife or bayonet combat is hardest, followed by pistols, rifles, and finally, artillery or bombs, which are easiest because they're impersonal. How do you reduce this resistance? Target anonymous groups with grenades, or use group methods like machine guns, or firing squads where individual responsibility is diluted. It's easier to pull the trigger when you don't know exactly who you're killing, or when you know someone else might have pulled the trigger for you. This leads to a really strange paradox about PTSD. For decades, we thought combat trauma stemmed mainly from the terror of being killed, the fear conditioning gone haywire. But consider drone pilots. They sit safely in Nevada, directing strikes thousands of miles away. They face no immediate danger. Yet their PTSD rates are just as high as soldiers in the trenches. Why? Because drone warfare enables a terrifyingly intimate form of killing. Operators watch targets for weeks, seeing their daily lives, their families. Then they watch the aftermath, the slow death of the wounded, the retrieval of bodies, the funerals. One pilot described watching a man lose his leg and bleed out, watching him fade to the color of the ground. This isn't impersonal killing. It's intensely personal, visualized, and prolonged. Grossman suggests this is the core trauma, not the fear of death. Sailors and medics in World War II who killed impersonally or not at all had lower breakdown rates. Modern military training is getting better at overriding our natural inhibitions, using VR to make shooting reflexive, leading to higher firing rates. But as long as we continue to see the faces of those we kill, this inhibition, this potential for empathy even in conflict, remains profoundly significant. Future wars might involve autonomous weapons or cyber attacks, but the psychological impact of seeing the human cost might persist. Given all this complexity, understanding conflict, cooperation, reconciliation, maybe we need a dedicated field? Just like there are specialists for obscure things like dust, coniologists, or flags, vexillologists, could there be peaceology? The scientific study of what actually promotes peace, trade, demographics, religion, contact, reconciliation, and so on. It sounds ambitious, maybe even naive given the sheer amount of human misery and conflict we witness. Every new example of our worst tendencies makes this intellectual pursuit feel like rolling a boulder uphill. But perhaps, just perhaps, focusing on the mechanisms, the psychology, the sociology, the history can offer insights. It's an intellectual venture with immense potential to help the world. And while the challenges are daunting, ending on a slightly more hopeful note, let's acknowledge the emotional certainty that things can change, that we can be changed, and that individual actions, however small, can contribute to that change. Now let's look at baboons specifically through the lens of social plasticity. For years, baboons were textbook examples of aggressive, hierarchical primates, the kind Devore described as having an aggressive temperament integral to their personalities. But then came the garbage dump troop. Living near a tourist lodge, they got access to a steady supply of trash. Suddenly their lives changed. No more 10-mile daily treks. They waddled down for a feast, gained weight, developed metabolic syndrome. They became sedentary, feisty eaters. This attracted the biggest, most aggressive males from the neighboring troop to raid the dump. Then disaster struck. A TB outbreak, likely from infected meat, wiped out most of the garbage dump troop, including all the aggressive raiders. When the researchers returned years later, the remaining troop was astonishingly different. Low aggression, high affiliation, constant grooming, relaxed hierarchy. Males still fought for status, but rarely took it out on bystanders. Stress levels were low, and here's the kicker. Young males transferred into this troop adopted its gentle ways. They weren't inherently less aggressive. They learned it. How? Probably because the resident females, relieved of male aggression, started grooming and bonding with the newcomers much faster. The relaxed environment allowed assimilation. This incredible story of baboon transformation, from textbook aggressive to surprisingly peaceful, is a powerful reminder that our own behaviors, even our darkest ones, aren't necessarily fixed. Social context and culture matter immensely. Finally, let's zoom in on the individual. With billions of us, it's easy to feel insignificant. But history shows otherwise. We know the big names: Mandela, Gandhi, MLK, Rosa Parks, Lincoln, Suu Kyi, catalysts who paid dearly. And whistleblowers like Ellsberg, Silkwood, Deep Throat, Provence, Snowden, who risked everything. But sometimes it's the lesser-known individuals whose singular acts ripple outwards. Think Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian fruit seller who, after enduring police harassment, set himself on fire. His act wasn't planned, it was raw rage. Yet it sparked the Arab Spring, changing the course of history in 20 countries. Or Zenji Abe, the Japanese pilot who, decades after Pearl Harbor, repeatedly apologized to survivors, bridging a chasm of hatred. Or Hugh Thompson Jr., the helicopter pilot at My Lai, who landed between the U.S. soldiers and the Vietnamese civilians, threatening his own troops to protect the villagers, defying every instinct of us versus them. And then there's John Newton, the former slave ship captain who became an abolitionist and composer of Amazing Grace. His journey wasn't heroic overnight. It was slow, fraught with inconsistency, driven by gradual moral awakening. These stories, from Bouazizi's shocking act to Newton's painstaking transformation, remind us that individuals matter. Change happens, sometimes dramatically, sometimes slowly, but it starts somewhere, somehow, often with just one person.